6 black SUVs pulled up in front of my house at 9:17 inches the morning. No sirens. No flashing lights. No markings. Just dark-tinted windows and men stepping out with expressions so cold the entire neighborhood went silent. I was trimming the rose bushes in the front yard when I heard the engines. When I looked up, I saw the convoy. And in that very moment, the instinct of someone who had served nearly 3 decades in the military told me this was not normal. Not normal at all. My name is Sarah Mercer. I was a lieutenant commander in the United States Coast Guard. I had spent 26 years on the water, in the air, in weather that would make most people quit. And I had never once, in all those years, been greeted at my front door by royal guards. Not once. And yet there they were, calling me by name, telling me a king wanted to see me. A king. What I didn't know, in that moment, was that 3 hours earlier, my sister Vanessa had just gotten married. And the secret she'd been protecting for 6 months was already beginning to unravel. I've thought about whether to share this story publicly for a long time, not because I'm ashamed of anything that happened, but because it involves my sister, and some wounds deserve to be handled carefully even after they've healed. I'm telling it now because I think it might reach someone who needs it. Someone sitting somewhere right now, feeling like the people who should love them most have looked right through them. If that's you, stay with me. Vanessa and I grew up in Kokomo, Indiana. Our father repaired HVAC systems. Our mother managed the front desk at a dental practice. We weren't poor, but we learned early that nothing came without work. Growing up, Vanessa was the dreamer. She covered her half of our shared bedroom with magazine, cutouts, penthouses, runway fashion, luxury resorts, European royalty. She wanted a life that looked remarkable. I wanted a life that meant something. Different dreams. Neither of us wrong. And as children, we were close. Really close. When boys at school gave her a hard time, I stepped between them. When she struggled in chemistry, I stayed up late, walking her through it. When our parents' arguments leaked through the walls at night, we'd sit in the hallway together and whisper about futures that felt better. I thought we'd always have that. Life had other opinions. Vanessa moved to Chicago after high school. She built a career in luxury event, planning smart, relentless, talented. I enlisted in the Coast Guard. The years accelerated the way they do when you're always somewhere far from home. Deployments, search and rescue operations, training cycles, long silences with everyone you love. Vanessa and I still talked, just not often. And each year, our conversations grew shorter and more polished, less honest. Then, 2 years before this story, she called me breathless. She'd met someone. His name was Prince Matteo. He belonged to a royal family in Northern Europe, not one of the famous dynasties, but a real and respected monarchy. Their relationship moved fast. The media loved the story. An American woman from Indiana marrying into European royalty. For a while, I was genuinely happy for her. For a while, the engagement changed Vanessa. She became careful with every word, every photograph, every public appearance. I noticed it first when I flew to Chicago for dinner, about 6 months before the wedding. We sat at a restaurant nicer than anything we'd eaten at growing up, and she leaned across the table and said, very carefully, "You should probably avoid wearing your uniform around certain people." I put down my fork. Why? She hesitated. It just doesn't work with the image. The image. I sat with those words a long time that night. My uniform wasn't an image. It was 26 years of early mornings, missed holidays, friends lost at sea, a body that knew what exhaustion really meant. It wasn't decor. It was my life. I let it go. Told myself she was under enormous pressure. Made excuses for her the way I always had. And then the wedding invitations went out. Mine never arrived. I waited a week before calling her. Kept my voice light. "Hey, I think mine must have gotten lost in the mail." There was a pause. A long one. The kind that says everything before a word is spoken. Then she sighed. "Sarah, we kept the list to close family only." I laughed an involuntary, disbelieving sound. "Vanessa, I am close family." Another pause. Then, "You don't belong there." I couldn't breathe. "What does that mean?" I asked. Her voice went flat. "Please don't make this difficult." I said her name. And then she said the thing she'd apparently been building toward for months. "You're an embarrassment, Sarah." I stared at the wall of my apartment, the one with my unit citation and a photograph of my crew. Embarrassment. I didn't respond for a long time. When you spend years in service, You learn to manage emotion in real time. Tuck it down. Function. Grieve later. I did that. I kept my voice steady. I hope you're happy, Vanessa. And I ended the call. That night, alone, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to understand how we had gotten here. I thought about how you can love someone your entire life and still become strangers without either of you fully noticing. I want to pause for a second because I know some of you have felt this. Maybe not with a sister. Maybe with a parent, a friend, someone you carried for years. The moment when your sacrifice becomes someone else's inconvenience doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet. And the quiet is the worst part. The wedding was 3 weeks later. On that same morning, I attended a memorial service for 3 Coast Guard veterans who had passed away in the previous month. Not out of spite. Not as a gesture of defiance. Because those people mattered, and because I had nowhere else to go that day that felt real. The ceremony was held at a small waterfront memorial in Pensacola. The Gulf stretched out behind us, flat and silver in the morning light. I stood in my dress uniform beside Master Chief Raymond Torres, a retired officer in his late 60s who had become something of a mentor over the years. Halfway through the service, he looked over at me. "Wedding day," he said. Not a question. I glanced at him. "How did you know?" He smiled. "Because you've been staring at that memorial wall for 10 minutes without reading a single name on it." I laughed. The first real laugh of the morning. Raymond put a hand on my shoulder. "Family cuts deeper than enemies ever can," he said quietly. "That's not a criticism. That's just the truth about people we love." Those words stayed with me all the way home. Against my better judgment, I turned on the television when I got back. Every major network was covering the wedding. Helicopters, drone footage, hundreds of guests at a resort north of Pensacola Bay. And there was Vanessa, standing beneath an arch of white orchids in a gown that looked like something out of the magazines she'd pinned to our childhood bedroom walls. She looked beautiful, and I wanted to hate her, and I couldn't. That's the complicated truth about family. The love doesn't disappear when you're in pain. It just coexists with it, uncomfortably, without permission. I muted the television and sat with the silence. And memories surfaced. The way they always do when you're trying not to think. One summer when Vanessa was 17, she'd been accepted to a leadership program in Indianapolis. Our parents couldn't cover the fee. I was 14. I spent the entire summer doing every job I could find, weeding gardens, cleaning out garages, returning bottles for change. By August, I had enough. I handed it to her in an envelope. She held it like something sacred. She hugged me until my ribs ached. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to," I said. That was the truth. Caring for her had always felt natural. Another memory surfaced. Vanessa's second year in Chicago. She called me at midnight, crying. 3 months behind on rent. I had just received a re-enlistment bonus. I transferred the money that same night. She promised to pay it back. I never asked her to. Family isn't a ledger. Or at least I thought it wasn't. I switched the television off completely. Went outside. Watered my tomato plants. Let the heat of a Pensacola afternoon settle around me like something honest. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Watching the ceremony. Wishing you were here." A few seconds later. "Your dad keeps asking if you've heard from her." I hadn't. I typed back. "I'm okay. Love you." She replied. "I love you too, sweetheart." Those 3 words nearly broke me. Not the grand exclusion. Not the public wedding I wasn't attending. 3 words from a woman who had never once measured my worth by my usefulness to anyone. I had no idea that at approximately that same moment, the wedding had stopped being peaceful. What I learned later, Prince Matteo had spent hours scanning the guest seating, searching for a face he'd never met but had been expecting to see. He finally asked my parents where I was. My father, not knowing a lie had been constructed, said simply, "She wasn't invited." Matteo went still. He pulled Vanessa aside. And Vanessa, trapped, cornered, finally told him the truth. She had told the royal family my military obligations made attendance impossible. That I'd been informed and had no hard feelings. None of that was true. King Leopold overheard the exchange. And he had known my last name for years. I found all of this out later. In that moment, I was in my backyard, wondering whether my tomato plants needed water. Then I heard the engines. Low. Multiple. Moving slowly up my street. I looked up. Went around to the front of the house and stopped. 6 vehicles. Dark. No markings. Men in uniforms I didn't recognize climbing out with the calm precision of a protection detail. My first instinct was that something terrible had happened. An accident. A military incident. Someone in my family. I went through the list before I even reached the front door. Then the lead officer walked up my path and said my name like he'd rehearsed it. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mercer. Yes. His Majesty requests your presence immediately. I stared at him. I'm sorry, whose Majesty? He produced identification. Royal seals. Security authorization. Everything I couldn't argue with. Though part of me wanted to. I looked past him at the convoy. At my neighbors beginning to drift toward windows. At Mrs. Calloway from 2 doors down, standing fully in her doorway, not even pretending she wasn't watching. Can I have 5 minutes? I asked. Of course, Commander. I stepped inside, leaned against the closed door. This cannot be real, I thought. I have no connection to any royal family. I am a Coast Guard officer who was not invited to her sister's wedding and spent the morning at a veterans ceremony. And yet, I changed. Not because anyone instructed me to. Because 26 years of service had conditioned me. How you show up matters, especially in situations you don't understand. I put on my dress uniform, the one Vanessa once called part of an image that didn't fit. I stood at the mirror for a moment. Then I opened the front door. The drive took 47 minutes. No one volunteered information. I asked questions. I received polite non-answers. Is everyone safe? Yes. Has something happened? Not authorized to say. Am I in trouble? The faintest smile from the guard in the front seat. No, Commander. At least that was something. We turned onto the resort property, and I saw the full scale of it. Satellite trucks, media tents, photographers behind barriers, hundreds of guests visible through floor-to-ceiling glass. The convoy moved through a cleared path and stopped. My door was opened. I stepped out. Heads turned, all of them. The whole room seemed to pivot at once. 200 people staring at a woman who wasn't supposed to be there. I straightened my back, adjusted my cover, and walked forward. Near the entrance I saw my parents. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father looked like he'd seen something impossible. Neither of them knew I was coming. That actually helped. It meant I wasn't being staged. This wasn't theater. Prince Matteo approached first. In person he looked younger than his photographs. More anxious. He shook my hand and said my name like it carried weight. Then an older man crossed the room toward me. Not quickly, not formally. Directly the way people move when they've made a decision. And nothing is going to stop them. Every person in the room straightened. King Leopold stopped 3 feet in front of me and studied my face for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. It's definitely you. Your Majesty, have we met? In a way, he smiled. 6 years ago. The earthquake relief mission in Southeast Asia. Everything inside me shifted. I remembered that mission clearly. 3 weeks of disaster relief on a coastline that no longer looked like it had ever been peaceful. Our teams worked alongside local agencies to move displaced civilians, manage medical triage, deliver supplies by any means available. I had come home thinner, quieter, and grateful in a way that took months to settle. During that mission, the king continued, there was an accident on a mountain road above one of the coastal villages. The memory arrived before he finished the sentence. A switchback road in rain so heavy it felt like pressure. Our caravan moving cautiously. Another vehicle coming from the opposite direction, sliding, overcorrecting, striking a retaining wall. 2 people ejected. One still inside. An older man. Trapped. Calm in a way that frightened me more than panic would have. I had climbed into the wreckage and stayed with him while our team coordinated for emergency services from the valley. I remember talking to keep him conscious about Indiana, about the Coast Guard, about the way summer thunderstorms rolled across the Midwest when you were a kid. Anything that kept his eyes open. 2.5 hours. It had felt like a Tuesday. You pulled me from that vehicle, the king said. The room went completely still. You remained beside me for over 2 hours. You told me stories about a girl who used to help her neighbors without asking for anything in return, and still didn't think she was doing anything remarkable. He smiled. I remembered that detail specifically. For several seconds I couldn't speak. I looked at this man, this king, and tried to connect the memory of an injured stranger and crushed metal to the person standing before me in this reception hall. Finally, I never knew who you were. I know, he said. You never asked. Soft laughter moved through the room. You never asked my name. Never asked my position. Never inquired what might come from helping me. A pause. You saw a human being who needed help, and you stayed. His voice strengthened. That is not as common as it should be. And then, before I could absorb any of it, King Leopold turned and walked to the microphone at the center of the pavilion. The orchestra stopped. Conversations died. The king waited until the only sound was the distant movement of water in Pensacola Bay outside the windows. And he told the entire room. He described the accident. Every detail, the rain, the impact, the 2.5-hour wait in a wrecked vehicle on a mountain road above a village that had already lost too much that week. He spoke not as a monarch delivering a formal statement, but as a father describing the day he almost didn't come home. I stood at the edge of that room and tried very hard not to disappear. When he finished, he looked directly at me. She never asked who I was. A pause. She never asked what reward might follow. Another pause. His voice filled the pavilion. She saw a human being who needed help. One person stood first. An older veteran near the front, in a civilian suit but with the posture of someone who'd worn a uniform for decades. He began applauding. Then another stood. Then another. Within 30 seconds, the entire room was on its feet. I want to be honest with you about what that felt like. I am not someone who cries easily. 26 years in service will recalibrate your baseline for what constitutes a crisis. But standing there in my dress uniform, the one Vanessa had called an embarrassment in a room full of strangers applauding for something I'd completely forgotten because it had seemed so ordinary. Something in my chest cracked open in a way I didn't have words for. I thought about the memorial service that morning, about the names on the granite wall, about Raymond Torres saying family wounds deeper than enemies, about a phone call 3 weeks earlier where my own sister used a word I'd been trying to set down ever since. And now this. I managed a small wave. The room laughed warmly, and for a moment, I stopped trying to manage any of it, and simply let myself be there, in that moment, fully. Mateo spoke after his father. His voice was emotional in a way that didn't feel performed. He told the room he'd been hearing about the woman who saved his father for 6 years, and that when he discovered she was Vanessa's sister, it had felt like the world had done something beautiful and deliberate. He raised his glass. The room raised theirs. A second ovation. I managed another wave, longer this time, and then I made myself look at Vanessa. She wasn't angry. She wasn't performing composure. She was crying. Not the careful, photogenic kind. Real tears. The kind that surface when something you've spent years protecting finally breaks open in front of everyone. She was standing near a pillar across the hall, watching a room of strangers give a standing ovation to the sister she'd been trying to hide for 6 months. I knew that look. I understood, in that moment, more than I'd ever understood about my sister. If you have ever tried to outshine someone you love, spent years building something visible because you were terrified of being overlooked, I think you'll recognize that expression. It's the face of someone who has finally stopped running and doesn't know what to do with the stillness. The reception continued through the afternoon. Guests approached my table. Veterans, family, friends, diplomats. A few journalists kept at a respectful distance by the security team. I kept saying the same thing. I was just doing my job. Most smiled like they thought I was being modest. I wasn't. To me, it had simply been a mission. It had just also, apparently, changed things I didn't know were in motion. Late in the afternoon, I found a balcony overlooking Pensacola Bay and stood there alone for the first time all day. The water was amber in the late light. Sailboats moved slowly in the distance. The sounds of the reception drifted faintly through the closed glass behind me. Music, laughter, the comfortable noise of a celebration continuing. I exhaled. Then the door opened. I didn't turn around. I already knew. Vanessa's footsteps stopped beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Years of hurt standing quietly between us, not knowing what shape to take. I don't know how to start, she finally said. Try the truth, I said. It's probably overdue. She made a sound half laugh, half something that hurt. Then, when we were kids, everyone always admired you. I turned to look at her. That wasn't what I expected. Not just mom and dad. Her voice wavered. Everyone. Teachers, neighbors, people we barely knew. You'd do something and people would remember it. And I'd be standing right there. And no one would even glance at me. I said nothing. I let her talk. You gave me money when I couldn't pay rent. You helped me get into that program when we were kids. You defended me my entire life. She wiped her eyes. And somehow I turned all of that into a reason to resent you. I thought about the 14-year-old who spent a summer earning money so her sister could go to a leadership camp. about the young Coast Guard enlistee who wired rent money in the middle of the night without being asked. About how I'd done those things not to be noticed, not to be praised, but because she was my sister and it was simply what you did when you loved someone. I convinced myself you were my competition, she said. But you were never competing, were you? It wasn't a question. No, I said quietly. Never. Her shoulders dropped. Something she'd been carrying for years seemed to leave her body all at once. I was terrified, she whispered, that people would watch you walk in and forget I was the bride. There it was. The whole truth, finally, in open air. I looked at my sister, really looked, and I didn't see the woman who'd called me an embarrassment 3 weeks ago. I saw the girl from the hallway in Kokomo, the one who taped magazine cutouts to her bedroom wall, because she was afraid that an ordinary life meant an invisible one. Vanessa, I said, and I pulled her into a hug. She cried. I cried. We both stood there on that balcony making a complete mess of ourselves while a royal reception continued 50 feet away, and neither of us cared at all. When we finally pulled apart, she laughed at how we looked. I laughed too. It felt clean the way laughter does after something hard finally passes through you. Matteo appeared a few minutes later. He stepped onto the balcony, read the room instantly, and wrapped an arm around Vanessa's shoulders with the kind of quiet steadiness that told me everything I needed to know about him. Am I interrupting? He asked. No, Vanessa said. She was smiling. Actually smiling. Not performing one. Later that evening, King Leopold invited me to join a small family dinner. No reporters, no protocol, no ceremony, just a table and a meal, and a conversation that moved easily from serious things to nothing at all. Before the night ended, he presented me with a civilian honor from his country for the rescue years earlier. I accepted it gratefully, but I want to be honest with you. It wasn't the most valuable thing I received that day. The most valuable thing was sitting across from my sister an hour later, laughing at a story she told about our father getting lost in the resort and wandering into the kitchen staff entrance. The most valuable thing was realizing, somewhere in the middle of that laughter, that the distance between us wasn't permanent. It was just distance. Months passed. Life returned to its shape. I stayed in the Coast Guard. Vanessa and Matteo built their life together. The news cycle moved on, but something real stayed. Vanessa started calling regularly, not for any particular reason, just to talk. Birthdays became events again. Our parents stopped feeling like they were managing a Cold War. Trust didn't come back all at once. It came back in small moments, the way light comes back in the morning gradually, until you stop noticing the dark was ever there. This story has taught me things I'm still learning. Character is the only thing that survives every circumstance. Status changes, titles change, public perception shifts constantly. But the person you are when no one is watching, when there is no reward waiting, no applause scheduled, when the only reason to do a thing is that it's right, that version of you is the only one that lasts. And forgiveness. I want to say something real about that. People ask if I felt vindicated that day. If it felt satisfying watching the truth come out in front of hundreds of people. Honestly, I felt sad. Then I felt something softer. Forgiveness isn't something you give people because they've earned it. It's something you give yourself permission to do because carrying someone else's choices is too expensive, too heavy, too many years. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be right when they could just be free. The mistake most people make is waiting for the other person to change before they decide to let go. But forgiveness doesn't begin when they earn it. It begins when you stop needing them to. Here's a question I'll leave you with. Is there someone in your life you've quietly put down not because you stopped loving them, but because the hurt was easier to carry alone? What would it cost you to make one call, send one message? You never know what one honest conversation might open. Before I go, I want to know where you are with this story. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think Vanessa got exactly what she deserved and nothing more. Drop a 2 if you think she was more complicated than that. Someone who made a terrible choice for a deeply human reason. Drop a 3 if you've been on one side of this kind of story yourself, either the one who was excluded or the one who did the excluding. I read them all, every single one. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. This story has traveled to places I never expected, and it still surprises me every time. If storytelling like this means something to you, if you want to keep walking through stories that are honest about how complicated the people we love can be, I'd be honored if you stayed. Hit subscribe. Not for the numbers, because I think the world needs more of this kind of conversation, and I'd love to keep having it with you. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Pensacola, Florida to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.